Welcome to The Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. When most people think of Brazilian music, what might come to mind are bossa nova and samba. But apart from these popular genres, Brazil also has a rich history in classical music. Dr. Paulo Steinberg is a professor of piano at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Paulo is a virtuoso at his craft who has performed as a soloist in some of the finest venues in the world, including the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., and Theatro Municipal de São Paulo in his homeland of Brazil. In 2017, Paulo released a solo piano album called Alma Brasileira, Brazilian Soul, which is a collection of classical pieces by some of Brazil's most beloved composers. Paulo is here to talk about his rhythmic album, give us a lesson in Brazilian musicology, and open up about his distinguished career. It's a pleasure to welcome Paulo Steinberg to the show. Hi, Paulo.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm very honored and looking forward to this great conversation on Brazilian music.
Me too. I know that you're performing in Europe right now, and you're currently in Riga, Latvia. Can you tell us a little bit about your tour at the moment?
Well, I would say it's the most wonderful trip I have ever been to and I have ever done. I came here to, in fact, not only perform, but also look for my roots. My father was born here in Riga, and my mom's parents were also born in a small town in Latvia. And I am here, I have been here for 2 months, I still have another month to go, when I'm just absorbing everything I can when it comes to culture, to places, to music, to the language, and I'm really having a blast.
That's wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about the repertoire that you're playing at the moment on your tour?
I chose to play mostly Brazilian music. I, in fact, played a few pieces by Latvian composers as well, with Latvian musicians, but my deal with them was that I would also perform Brazilian music with them. So we had this great combination and variety of genres and styles and countries, but mostly I am playing pieces by Ernesto Nazaré and Heitor Villa-Lobos, written for solo piano.
That's great. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. You've had a storied career, having won several competitions in Brazil. You were awarded a scholarship to pursue advanced degrees in piano performance. You got your bachelor's in piano at the Universidade de São Paulo, did your master's at Arizona State University, and your doctorate at Indiana University. As I mentioned, you're a professor at James Madison University. You perform all around the world. Tell us about what got you into music and why classical piano?
Well, it all started when I was 5 and my brother started taking piano lessons. When he did, I cried to my mom and I said that I want to do the same. I loved when he came home with homework and would just have to draw the notes. And I was fascinated by the whole thing, by the visual, but also by the auditive. And I cried and I said, I want to play piano. And I never stopped except for maybe 1 year when I was a teenager. And that's normally when teenagers stop playing because they are more interested in playing the street and having fun. But I have to say that what I did in the beginning, in my childhood, which was super hard, I had a very hard childhood. My father passed away when I was 7 years old. I then had, in a matter of a year, my mom got married to my stepfather who adopted us. We had to move from our house and everything turned upside down all of a sudden. Meanwhile, I kept playing the piano. Well, I was 16, my older brother passed away and I had to play at his funeral, which was also super hard. I didn't have much money, so my childhood was definitely not, I would say, enjoyable. I really did not enjoy it. I had lots of great things happening, but also lots of hardships. Meanwhile, I was always playing the piano, which I think helped me survive and helped me actually get through everything. I still was told by my family, or especially by my uncle, that I should do computer science in college as a profession because as a musician I would not survive. And I tried the first year. I was always an A student, but that year I failed a class in computer science. So I said, you know what, this is not for me. I should go back to what I always loved to do. In fact, an angel came to my life. That's my aunt, who's now 93 years old. And she was the one who said, is that what you want, to do computer science? And I said, no. So what do you like? I said, I like to play the piano. So she said, okay, quit. I will pay for your books for piano, for your music books, and you are going to do what you like. And since then, it's just like what happens in life normally when we think that we are doing the right thing, but of course everything goes against us. This time I decided, okay, I'll turn completely to a completely different direction, 180 degrees, and now I'm going to follow music. And since then, everything started going right. I, of course, was lucky to be admitted in one of the best schools for music in Brazil, that was Universidade de São Paulo. But I also was admitted in the Unicamp, University of Campinas, which only had 2 openings, and also Unesp, which is another university in São Paulo. So I could choose. And from there, everything started going my way. I ended up finishing my degree, and I always loved classical music. So to answer your question, I had piano lessons since I was 5, and automatically, I guess when we start taking piano lessons, normally you follow the classical career. This happened more often in the past than it happens now. Now we have many more options. But since then, as I said, from USP, University of São Paulo, I was awarded a scholarship from the government of Brazil to pursue my master's degree in Arizona. From there, I got another scholarship from the Indiana University to pursue my doctorate. From there, I got a job right after I finished. And it has been going like this from the very first time when I said, okay, I want to do piano as a career. And that's why I'm here. I'm in Latvia now, playing concerts, Brazilian music concerts, as I said, and enjoying the whole experience. It seems like every day or every year it gets better and better.
Wow. It sounds like music really saved you in a way, having experienced those early losses in your life, your father and your brother. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did music help you through those difficult times?
First, I think it was a distraction because I remember being a sad time, especially when my father passed away. I remember until today that I looked behind my mom. We were standing in the funeral. I looked behind my mom, and my brother, my younger brother, was on the other side, and I was just crying. He was crying. We looked at each other, and we said, and now, what do we do? Of course, at that time, I was not aware that music was helping me. But looking back, I think that's exactly what happened. I was a very timid person. I still am, but I think music also gave me confidence because I had so many successes, as you said, in competitions, winning prizes in Brazil, and then that I think gave me this power and the courage to say, hey, actually, I'm worth it. I can do this. I barely would speak a word in public in Portuguese, and now I'm speaking English. In every concert I play, I love to just talk about the pieces. I love to give the background. I love to teach as I play. And that, I think, is also due to music. Is music giving me this confidence that after playing, I hear the applause, I hear the amazing job, and people coming to me and hugging me and saying, "Wow, this was amazing! This was wonderful." And I think that all gives us, the security that I can keep going, and this is what I should do. It's affirmation as well.
And part of that affirmation was the mentorship or guidance of your aunt to pursue your passion in music. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of having someone to advocate for you and support you in a creative pursuit?
Well, my aunt, Zenta is her name. She actually lives in Toronto, Canada. And she, from the very beginning, in fact, when I was considering studying at the conservatory in Campinas, which is a high school level course for pianists or for musicians, and I wanted to do that course, but of course I didn't have any money. So again, my angel Zenta said, "You know what? I will pay for your course. You should do it." So having her to support me in the most important moments in my life, because that happened when I studied at the conservatory, it happened when I decided to do music as a career in college. It also happened in pretty much every single university I went to after that. Arizona State, she was there. Then decisions about should I go to Indiana, so she was there too. So having someone to support you and be by your back the whole time, of course, gives me much more confidence to keep going. So I think that was a huge thing for me. She, in fact, my mom too, but she almost substituted or filled in the gap that I had from the lack of having a father that really loved me, because it was not the same with my stepfather. So I felt that with my aunt, I could keep going, and I always thank her for everything that I am today. So she played a big role, and I'm always thankful.
Well, another big role would be in your choice of music, not only classical music, but Brazilian classical music. So, how did playing compositions by some of the most celebrated Brazilian composers help your career?
Well, first I should say that we miss anything in life. We miss when we don't have it anymore. For example, I was in Arizona doing my master's, and that's when I started thinking, hey, I like Brazilian music, because I never really listened to Brazilian music that much when I was a child, when I was growing up. But then being in America made me feel that, hey, I miss Brazil. I miss Brazilian music. That's when I started playing, and even more when I was at my doctorate, when I was pursuing my doctorate degree in Indiana. That's when I started missing it and saying, you know what, I don't know anything about Brazilian music. Let me buy some CDs. So I bought CDs of Tom Jobim, I bought bossa nova, I bought samba CDs and forró. I needed all that, and it's really something that I never really thought about wanting before. So that started right there. And then after a few years, I was as one of our 8 recitals that we have to play for our doctorate, for our doctoral program. One of the recitals is a lecture recital, and then I could pick a topic. And that's when I decided, you know what, I need to do something Brazilian. And I said, let me read more about this. So I did some research. I started playing, looking at pieces that I never did before. I had played Villa Lobos, yes, but I had not played Ernesto Nazaré. Why? Because, at least at that time when I was studying before I went to America, we always saw Ernesto Nazaré as a pop composer, as a not really classical, and therefore we could not play it because it was not classical. But that changed because now, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed listening. I said, I want to play this. And so I did. I learned music by Villa Lobos and by Ernesto Nazaré. And I played. It was a success. The audience liked it. And my teacher, another angel, Evelyn Brancard is her name. And she said, you know what? You should do more exactly what you did today. Teaching about Brazilian music and playing Brazilian music, because you are really good at this. And since then, I decided to offer this lecture recital, or sometimes a recital with some comments. And that's what I have been doing since then. And I have traveled with this music all over the world, yes. And that's what I like the most, because I think it's in my blood. Although my father was born in Latvia, my mom is daughter of Latvians, my blood really officially should be Latvian blood. But because I was born in Brazil, I can feel the syncopation, I can feel the rhythm, I can sense, it's not only in my mind, in my ears, in my fingers, it's in my body, right, in my whole body. And that's why I decided, you know what, this is what makes me the most comfortable, the most confident, and the happiest. So since then, and it has been, I don't know, at least more than 20 years, that's what I have been doing. I play mostly Brazilian music. I also play other types, other genres, other periods of music, but I think I am myself the most when I play Brazilian music.
Of course, you're Brazilian. You were born and raised there. That is the culture that you're familiar with. It is the experiences, the history, the memories that you know. So it makes total sense that you would absolutely connect with Brazilian culture and at the same time celebrate your genealogical heritage. And I think that it's wonderful that you're in Latvia right now, connecting with your background, but at the same time playing Brazilian music.
Exactly. And of course, all these composers that I play also had influences from European traditions, all of them, right? So they are Brazilian composers, but just like I am a person who plays Brazilian music, I also had all this background from my family who grew up with Latvian habits also at home. But that's to say also that all the composers got influenced not only by European traditions, but also by what we are as Brazilians by who we are as Brazilians, such as we have influences from the indigenous music, from the indigenous culture. We have influences from the African culture. We have influences from the European culture, of course. And all that is still not enough. It's like all that plus everything we as people live, or where we are, where we went to, where we came from, and all that makes us who we are. And of course, that's what these composers also do. It's a melting pot for each one of them, with all these races and countries and nationalities all involved. And then here we are doing all that. It's doing world music. It's not just Brazilian, right? But it's world music.
Well, that is and I say this in quotations, the experience of the new world, right? Because unless you're indigenous, everyone comes from somewhere. Either they were brought there forcefully, or they were settlers, or they were immigrants. And so that is the new world experience across the Americas, of which Brazil is a part.
Exactly. And that is also to say that although we celebrate all those, we celebrate the indigenous, we celebrate the Africans, we also have to remember that that came through a lot of suffering and a lot of repression. At the same time, we have to remember that too, that we are discussing also resilience, right? So they all also endured, in their races, so that, all that now is a combination of all this suffering from not only one person, but different nationalities and different races. So I think we also should remember that it's not just celebrating and honoring them, but also remembering that thanks to them, we are who we are in Brazil as well.
That's an excellent point. I want to talk about what you teach as a professor. Do you teach Brazilian classical music to your students?
I do. I do teach Brazilian music, and I love to teach this genre. I would say that I teach music, and then Brazilian music is a vehicle through which I teach music. Of course, most of my students are interested and love when I say, okay, let's do a Brazilian piece. In fact, I do have doctoral students as well at James Madison University, where I teach. And I have had the pleasure to be a document advisor for 2 doctoral documents. 2 students of mine decided to do a dissertation. It's our equivalent of dissertation. We call it a document on Brazilian music. One on Camargo Guarnieri, the other one on a composer who is not known at all. His name is Orlando Fagnani, born in Campinas, and whose family decided to hide all the music after he died because they did not want him to actually, I don't know why, be famous or actually be known in the world. So, but we found a way to find his music, and my student could write about him. So I'm very proud to also say that not only I'm teaching music, Brazilian music, but I'm also somehow having my students love music to the point that they are also studying with more in depth about this genre and this music that I love, and now they are also doing the same, but going deeper and deeper, and that makes me very happy.
Wow, that's wonderful. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about your album. You focused on highlighting 4 Brazilian composers: Chiquinha Gonzaga, Ernesto Nazaré, Oscar Lorenzo Fernandes, and Heitor Villa-Lobos. There are 23 tracks on your album, and most of them are composed by Villa-Lobos. Is there a reason why you emphasized Villa-Lobos over the other composers?
I would say that Villa-Lobos, of all those four composers, Villa-Lobos is the most prolific. He composed many more pieces than the others composed. Although Nazaré composed a lot of Brazilian tangos and choros, but the variety that Villa-Lobos' music has, combined with the pedagogical importance, because Villa-Lobos also composed thinking, having in mind piano students and having in mind the level of students. So what I wanted to do is to have a compilation of music, of piano pieces that would be useful and helpful for all types of students, all levels of students. So I decided to then add some music by Villa-Lobos that are, I would say, more intermediate level, and the students would be able to then have a better idea of what Brazilian music is like, but also not only advanced music. Normally, when we buy a CD, we normally get these concert pianists playing the hardest music possible. And I didn't want that to be just a virtuoso CD, although there are virtuoso pieces, but they also, many of the pieces on the CD are pieces that are easy or intermediate level, that pianists who maybe has played for 5 years can play already. So that's my reason number one, to have so many pieces by Villa-Lobos. But I wanted to have a collection or a compilation of composers who have somehow some connections. They all have connections, these four composers: Lorenzo Fernandes, Chiquinha Gonzaga, Ernesto Nazaré, and Heitor Villa-Lobos. They all somehow were influenced by the choros, by the many races that we have in Brazil, and they all decided that they wanted to break away from the conventions, from the traditional conventions of classical music. They all used the Brazilian essence or the Brazilian elements to compose their music, which of course has some European traditions, but also have this innovative way of composing, which was to express themselves through their own culture and the elements that are present in their culture.
Can you describe what a choro is?
I always tell here that choro, in fact, is a Brazilian tango. There are two names for it. There's choro and there's Brazilian tango. And why? Many composers felt that Brazilian tango would be a more fancy word for the choro, which is more related to the peasants and to the lower class. And so there was this difference, but in fact those two things are the same. But choro, and I tell them here in Latvia, and I tell them in America as well, choro comes from the verb chorar, which means to cry. But why is it fast? Because normally if you think you're crying, normally crying is associated with sad music, and normally sad music is slow. But choro is fast. Most choros are fast. So I tell the audience that choros normally have sections that are in a minor mode, which makes the music a little more sad or melancholy at least. Also, choros have many times trills, little fast notes, right? 2-3 notes, that in my opinion are as if you are whining. And I say this and people love to hear when I say, I don't want to do this, I keep complaining. And that kind of whining is, I think, what choro many times is. So it's a genre of music that is Brazilian, but it was born with the polkas or the European dances that were brought by immigrants to Brazil, to Rio in the 1870s. And the musicians started playing those polkas, and they would do just jamming sessions in the streets, in the bars, in the restaurants, and their houses. Each one would bring an instrument, a very improvised way of playing, right? So one would bring the guitar or the cavaquinho, which is a little Brazilian guitar, just like the ukulele. So someone will bring the cavaquinho, someone will bring the accordion, another one will bring the flute, another one will bring the clarinet. Some, for sure, will bring the pandeiro or the tambourine, and lots of percussion. And suddenly, these jamming sessions were happening, and then from them came the choro. So the Brazilians started adding more and more syncopation to the polkas, and the choro was born. It is something very close, very similar to what happened with the ragtime in America. So it's also the same thing, syncopation, and then suddenly many instruments, and then suddenly now we have ragtime in America. In Brazil, that is our version of the ragtime. And I should say also that normally the choros are fast, but Alma Brasileira, the piece that I chose as my first piece on my CD, Alma Brasileira, which means Brazilian soul, is a choro. Is actually the only choro that Villa-Lobos wrote for the piano. He only wrote one. And this choro is slow. It starts in a very melancholy way. You can imagine maybe a guitar playing the introduction. Then you also hear some instruments joining, such as maybe the percussion with this constant 16th note that keeps going. Then you hear the clarinet playing a beautiful melody, and it progresses to a climax that imagine a lot of African drums, a lot of percussion playing this big dramatic section. And then finally at the very end, the music comes back, the choro, the slow choro comes back, just like the beginning, and finally it ends with a scream. For me, it's a scream. It's a very dissonant chord in the very end. And I normally prepare the audience for that. And I say, I will not scream with my voice, but you're going to hear a very different chord at the very end, just like Villa-Lobos normally used to do in the ends of his pieces.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about the journey of that choro because I was listening to it and melancholy was one of the words that came to mind. But there's also a hopefulness in that piece, and there is a playfulness and curiosity, and there's also a vibrancy and intensity to it. And I guess it's reminiscent of maybe the influences of native Brazil. I found it very compelling.
You see, for me, it's the perfect musical representation of what resilience is. Because the music starts as if nothing was going to happen, right? It starts, as you said, melancholic, it's sad, it's calm, but somehow it starts stretching, right? And it starts testing us, just like our lives, just like we normally experience in our daily lives. And that there's a limit to it, and it goes, the climax is so powerful, and it feels like everything is going to break, right? It feels like now there's no way, the tension is so much that either the piano is going to break or where can we go from here. But no, after all that tension, somehow finally now you're back to, oh, I'm here again, with the reminiscence of everything that happened. So it's not the same, but it does change us. And then I think that's what it's a great representation of what resilience is us doing it, stretching to the extreme, and then finally being back to ourselves.
There's also much resilience in the lives of these composers that you've selected. And I'd like to touch upon the biographies of each of them. You wrote excellent liner notes, but I did research myself. Wikipedia is amazing for that. So why don't we talk about each of these composers? And I'd like to talk about first Chiquinha Gonzaga. Chiquinha, she was born in 1847 and at a time when slavery was still active under the Empire of Brazil, which had only separated from the Portuguese royal court just 25 years earlier. And while Chiquinha's mother was of mixed race, her father was white and affluent and fully accepted her as his daughter. And because of that, he gave her the finest education, including piano training. She composed her first piece at 11. I was really surprised to read that. But Chiquinha's life was somewhat tragic after two failed marriages, the first of which had been arranged, but after it fell apart, she was disowned and was only allowed to take the eldest of her three children with her. She later had a fourth child with her second husband. Chiquinha thrived through music in Rio de Janeiro's theater scene, and her compositions soared into prominence in Brazilian society. At age 52, she fell in love with a 16-year-old Portuguese musician called João Batista Fernandes Lage. To cover up the scandalous relationship, Chiquinha adopted him, and this clandestine love affair was only made public after João's death in 1961 with the discovery of letters and photos of the couple. What a life!
I agree. And I was so surprised when I heard about all this. I said, wow, all that happening, and her music is always joyful, is always bubbly, although she does have a few sad pieces as well. But I felt, I could imagine, all this happening to her, and she's still going through her life and surviving, being strong, and I believe thanks to her music. She was also, right, the very first female conductor in Brazil. So she was one of the first to get the divorce. Female composer was a first. Female pianist was not acceptable. So she had many firsts, and as a very strong woman. I was trying to imagine, wow, okay, after I heard the story about her falling in love with a 16-year-old, I felt, okay, now her music makes sense also, you know. So she was always very full of life, I can say, right? Full of life and full of energy and full of courage, determination, self-determination, all that. A very strong woman. I was very fascinated when I heard all that story.
And it would be very easy to look at that with a critical lens. In fact, I had to stop myself from doing so. And so I found myself in a place where my instinct was to be judgmental. But then I had to take a step back and just sort of understand the historical context of her situation, what she lived through, and the challenges that she faced as a person. So that was a really interesting journey for me as I learned more about her history.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would not imagine that all that could happen and she still could function as a person. In my opinion, how she did, again, because music was with her, and that's how she could heal and how she could grow and how she could, in fact, use all the suffering and channel it through her music. So, a very, very powerful story.
How would you describe Chiquinha's musical style?
I think she's the most famous for one of the most famous marchinhas or pieces played in the carnival in the Mardi Gras in Brazil. I believe O Abre Alas que eu quero passar is composed by her. So I would say she is one of the best composers of the choros or Brazilian tangos. She and Ernesto Nazaré probably both are important composers. So in my opinion, she is a choro composer. She composed other genres as well. She composed polkas as well, other dances. But I would say when I think of Chiquinha Gonzaga, I think of exactly the choro type music.
It's interesting because there's a real distinction between each of these composers on your album, but I also see an overlap in what they produced. One piece that I felt that was very uniquely Chiquinho Gonzaga is Lua Branca, which means white moon. I was listening to this piece before I actually learned about her life story, but it actually sounds like her life story, because it really does have a sense of longing, this sense of perhaps unrequited love. And there's a gentle yet sorrowful and painful melody to it. How would you describe Lua Branca?
I think it's a great way to describe it. When we started this conversation tonight, you said that normally Brazilian music is samba and bossa nova, or that's how we know Brazilian music. But I'm here to say that Brazilian music has a lot of melancholy. And I want to show how. In my opinion, Chiquinha Gonzaga is a great example of that. Even though the music can be fun, it also contains this very deep feeling, deep emotion of something that really represents suffering and longing, as you said. That's a great word too. Not only Chiquinha Gonzaga, but all the other three composers I played in my CD. So they all have this in common, but I don't think it's only these four composers. In fact, I believe that Brazilian music has this as one of our characteristics. It has melancholy as one of the characteristics. We can, of course, try to get deeper into that and try to find out why, and of course, maybe each composer has their own reason to do it, but I feel that that's an important characteristic of Chiquinha Gonzaga. So Lua Branca does have this beautiful melody that is not a melody only to be played at the piano. In fact, it has lyrics. I can't remember if she wrote the lyrics or someone else wrote the lyrics. But it is a great musical representation of a soprano or a human voice singing their heart out. And it does have a beautiful melodic contour, and it makes us go back to our saddest moments in life, and makes us connect with the music in a way or another.
Let's move to Ernesto Nazaré. So he was born in 1863. He was a musician who was also drawn to the cafes and music halls of his hometown of Rio de Janeiro. And his specialty was composing what we were talking about, Brazilian tangos or choros. His mother taught him piano until the age of 10, and he continued his training after her death under the tutelage of American pianist and composer Charles Lucien Lambert. Lambert was born a free person of color in New Orleans, lived in Paris for a time, then moved to Rio to serve as chief musician in the court of Emperor Dom Pedro II. It would be safe to say, I'm assuming, that Lambert influenced Ernesto Nazareth's work.
That's for sure. And that's probably why we have this great connection with what was the ragtime in America, but then what it became in Brazil. He, at the same time, Ernesto Nazaré is known many times, is called the Brazilian Chopin, which is a great way to describe his music because his melodies are so beautiful, are memorable, just like Chopin's music. But at the same time, there's the Brazilian word in front of it. So he does use elements, rhythm, especially syncopation, and makes his music more than European or more than American or more than Creole. He makes it really Brazilian.
The one tango that I really resonated with, I love his pieces, is one called Odeon. What's interesting about this piece is I remember it from a Brazilian telenovela in the 1980s that we used to watch as a family, and I forget the name of the telenovela, but it was the soundtrack of it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I heard from people, is it Mulheres de Areia, maybe?
It's
Yeah.
possible.
But in fact, yes, it's one of the most famous pieces by Ernesto Nazaré. It, in fact, is the title of a movie theater where Ernesto Nazaré played as a pianist for silent movies. That was his job. So he was at that theater, which, according to what I read, is also the same theater where he met Heitor Villa-Lobos, who used to play the cello in the orchestra. So, a very important place in Rio. This is a piece that, in fact, a Brazilian tango that has been recorded for so many instruments or with so many combinations of instruments. I believe more than 200. Even though he composed it for the piano, now it's interesting, isn't it, that the choro started with instruments playing together in a jamming session. Well, then he composes a piece called Odeon for the piano. And then all the other instrumentalists liked it so much, started playing the piano piece with all these instruments that originally were playing the choros, and now it's just like a cycle that has been recorded so many times and is one of the favorites of, I would say, every single Brazilian knows this piece.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there are lyrics to this piece as well.
Yeah, but I don't think that was composed or written by the composer. I know that many choros have lyrics, but I believe they were written by other writers.
But this specific piece, Odeon, when I was listening to it, it actually does inspire me to dance and to actually dance with someone else. And it also, and I don't know if it's because of the telenovela, because it was a period piece, but it really does harken back to the 1920s.
Yeah, it has all the characteristics of a choro. It's a simple melody. It's almost a silly melody when it goes down. It's a scale that goes down on the beginning, on the bass. But yes, it is definitely infectious. It makes you want to hear more. It's almost addictive. And it does have the trills that I was talking about on the right hand, on the B section, on the second part. And then the third part there, normally choros have three sections. And the third section has much, what for me is much more like percussive instruments. And that's probably what he was thinking about, the percussive instruments on the third section. It definitely throws us back to the past. I believe the piece was actually composed in 1910, but it became so famous and of course was played throughout the previous century, and it's still a favorite, my favorite too.
That's great. So let's move on to the next composer, Oscar Lorenzo Fernandez. So he was born in 1897, and his parents had hopes of him becoming a doctor, but his love of music took him in the opposite direction and was taught by celebrated composer Antonio Francisco Braga and renowned cellist Frederico Nascimento at the Instituto Nacional de Música in Rio de Janeiro. In fact, Braga wrote the music to the Brazilian flag anthem, but Oscar's works is not anthem-like at all. Although inspired by his native Brazil, Oscar was drawn to European classical music, and his compositions are reminiscent of that style. Oscar left a significant mark with the founding of the Brazilian Conservatory of Music in 1936. What more can you share about his life and his compositions?
So, if I remember it right, he comes from Spanish family. I identify with the fact that his parents wanted him to pursue medicine, and he just didn't do it. He wanted music. So another example, and that happened with other composers as well, is, you know, in the end is what you feel you should do, and there's no one that can tell you or they can guide you, but in the end is whatever you feel, is whatever you want to do. He has a very lyrical style. His first piece from the suite number 2, which is what I record on the CD, is an amazing, very short piece, a little more than 1 minute, but it has such a beautiful melody with a beautiful, simple but and beautiful harmony. Not so difficult, so I can assign that piece to more intermediate level students. So he made it very accessible. But it's, again, a great example of melancholy in Brazilian music. It does change on the second piece when you hear what seems to be okay and seems to be another easy piece to play. It actually gets very complicated in the style of Chopin. So he was influenced still by European traditions. As we were saying, he was added elements from Brazil, but also still the writing is very European. So you hear double notes, which is very hard to perform, double notes on the right hand, played at the same time, a very complicated writing that reminds us of the ballades of Chopin. And finally, he goes back on the third piece to a more Brazilian spirit, a very fun dance. And you can imagine really Africans with their big percussive instruments, tambourines, bongos, and everything you can think of, all coming to jam together for this amazing celebration. It's like a parade almost. You start with something that is like nonchalant and maybe, okay, this is going to be just another cute piece. But no, it becomes very powerful with a big climax at the end with all the drums playing together, just like a big orchestra of drums. So I really enjoy this piece, and in my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful pieces by Lorenzo Fernandes, and that's why I picked specifically this one.
You mentioned earlier that Heitor Villa-Lobos is one of the most prolific composers, Brazilian composers, although deceased. He was born in 1887. He was not only a composer, but he was also a conductor, a cellist, and a guitarist. And his musical style was influenced by all of the changes going on around him. And of course, just like the other composers that we've talked about, heavily influenced by the rich art scene of Rio de Janeiro. In his lifetime, Brazil had ended slavery and ditched the empire in favor of a republic, which had a really shaky start. And legend has it that in his teens, Villa-Lobos traveled to the interior of Brazil, and that's where he became musically inspired by indigenous culture. He later moved to Paris, where he established himself as a composer and befriended prolific French musician Darius Milhaud, to whom he influenced as well. Surprisingly, Villa-Lobos only started learning to play the piano in 1913 from his wife, Lucilia Guimarães, who was a pianist herself. And I was reading this in your liner notes. He was considered the Latin Rachmaninoff, and he was able to bridge traditional classical melodies with the native folk music of his homeland. So what else can you share about him and his style of music?
I know, I also read that during his childhood, he was forbidden to listen or go to choros performances by his parents. But even though the books say that he would hide or would just leave the house without his parents knowing, and he would attend the choros. So he was very interested in the choros. That's a legend, but who knows, maybe it is true, as you said, that he took this journey in Brazil and wanted to go study the indigenous music and transcribe the music of all these distant people and distant cultures inside Brazil. So he went to the jungle, he traveled for sure, he was interested in our culture so much that in fact he said when he composed his Dance of the White Indian, which is one of the pieces I have on my CD, he wrote that that piece is his autobiography. That piece is who he is his musical autobiography, meaning he's a white Indian, so he's so close to our culture to the point that he himself considers himself an indigenous person, a white indigenous person. So you hear the same thing on this piece also, this element of simplicity, indigenous as well, folk as well, a very short motif. influences from indigenous, from his travels, from children's songs that he also researched and used in his music. All this made him this compilation or this fusion of all the styles, plus, as you said, Rachmaninoff, plus also other composers, even Debussy. We can hear Debussy in his music. We can hear influences from French music. He actually lived in Paris when he composed also the Alma Brasileira in 1925. That's when he composed Alma Brasileira, and he was in Paris. So you can hear this fusion of so many styles all together, with the essence being Brazilian. Why? Well, he normally tried and liked to use Brazilian titles in his music. He's also being influenced by nationalism, when composers started using and in fact adding literally the word Brazilian in their titles. There are lots of pieces with Brazilian. Even Lorenzo Fernandes wrote the Suite Brasileira, or the Brazilian Suite. Villa-Lobos, the Ciclo Brasileiro, the Brazilian cycle. He wrote Festa no Sertão. Sertão is a very typical arid area in Brazil, not a jungle, but arid area. Many times this Festa no Sertão is translated as Jungle Festival in English, but it's not right, it's not correct. So he loved using landscapes in his titles, very unique Brazilian landscapes, very unique Brazilian characters. What I think is so important about Villa-Lobos is that even though he used a lot of Rachmaninoff style playing, he used a lot of Stravinsky playing, he used a lot of Debussy playing or Debussy writing, compositional techniques. Still, we hear that, but then we hear this Brazilian feeling. We hear the melancholy that comes back all the time. We hear the fact that he was a cellist. We hear that in his music because he loves to compose in the middle register of the piano, close to the range where the cello would play. An example is this Festa no Sertão, the middle section, when it becomes melancholy again. You hear this melody played by the left hand on the thumb, which is right in the middle of the piano. For me, it's him being a cellist. Anyway, his music is just so rich and incredible that I could speak for another hour. But I would say he definitely used this fusion And that's what we see in his music, the fusion of so many elements that he could experience and then could use it freely and naturally.
It's interesting how you said that Dança do Índio Branco was really his expression of his soul. Because as I was listening to it, I was thinking, wow, this really does sound Brazilian. Even though it's a classical piece, it sounds classically Brazilian and very unique from the other pieces that you have on the album. So it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, and I should say also that what he did, and I tell this story also to the audiences when I play, that his music is also, to me, it sounds as if you are dancing. And it sounds as if you are dancing because the hands keep alternating all the time. The left and the right hand keep alternating. So I dance with my hands, but I also imagine someone in Brazil, in the middle of nowhere, where the soil is very hot. You cannot stand still, so you start moving your feet and then you start alternating your feet and you start dancing. So this is his music, is a lot of dance, is a lot of dancing hands, but it's also a lot of big basses that happen all the time. For those who are listening and are musicians, you can hear this very generous, deep basses that he asks us, and normally we use a lot of pedal to really make them being heard for a while. So we hear these basses, which is a level, for me also, is as if you are in the forest, and in the forest we have all together. We listen to the sound of the birds, we listen to the waterfall, we listen to the river, we listen to all the animals all together making noise or making music. And then you as a listener have to try to distinguish what you want to hear, because his music is very dense. You hear so many layers all together. Not only because layers of instruments, just like we talked about in the choros, but really layers of events happening all together. So it's this big bass on the left hand, then there's a melody in the middle, and then there's still some accompaniment in another, what seems to sound like a third hand. That is very, very Villa-Lobos. And one more thing I want to mention is Villa-Lobos loves what we call bitonality. That is, one hand plays white keys and the other hand plays black keys. But they alternate, so you don't really hear that as a big dissonance or ugly sound, but you hear it a very organic way of writing, when the right hand is always playing whites and the left hand is always playing blacks, and it really works very well. You have examples like that in so many pieces, including Festa no Sertão and also Dance of the White Indian.
I'm a romantic at heart, and when I was listening to Impressões Serrasteiras, I was totally drawn to that piece. It's just so ethereal. You were talking about trills. He uses trills immensely in this piece, and really hard, passionate chords as well.
That has everything. That is a collage of so many styles all together. I love that piece too. So you hear also a lot of Rachmaninoff in that piece. You also hear Chopin. You hear a beautiful waltz in the beginning. But you're right, it has the trills, and that for me, at the same time, it has the big basses. Then suddenly the right hand goes to the top and makes, another flourishing and what sometimes they call noodling. But you have so many different levels all happening at the same time, and it's still, even though with so many different styles, you hear it as a unit and the piece works. It is highly influenced by European traditions, but it also has this Brazilian element of the seresta, or imagine just someone singing a serenade to his girlfriend who's there on the top of the window, and you can hear that quality of as well. It's like, please love me, I'm here for you, right? And you can hear that in the very beginning of the piece.
Well, speaking of collections, this is one of many in your CD, your interpretation of the compositions of these brilliant Brazilian composers. It's called Alma Brasileira. Where can people get your CD? How can people find your music?
That's a good question. I recorded my CD in Stockholm, Sweden, and I was told that I would have it posted on iTunes and Spotify. It still hasn't happened. So the only way is, for now, if you are interested, I can send you a copy. The only way for you is just to tell me, write me, and I can send you a copy.
And we'll share your details in a moment. What is one thing you would like people to know about Brazilian classical music?
Well, that's what I tell my audience in the very beginning, that Brazilian music is not only samba and bossa nova, and that there are so many more Brazilian composers. In fact, my CD has these 4 main composers, but nowadays it's amazing the number of Brazilian composers we have that are living composers. So I would say, if you have a chance, do a search, or a Google search, or go on YouTube, type Brazilian composers or living Brazilian composers, and you're going to be surprised with how much we have and how beautiful our music is. They write in different styles. There are many who write in very modern styles, but also those who like to go back to the past and write beautiful lyrical music, lyrical melodies. And I would say, if you are interested, dig in. You're going to find lots of surprising pieces and composers.
I was reading on your website that you have a partnership with an organization in Rio de Janeiro called Música no Museu that co-sponsors annual music competitions and offers scholarships to up-and-coming musicians. What more can you share about your involvement with this organization, and how important is it for you to support young musicians?
Unfortunately, the Brazilian government is cutting funds, so our partnership for the past few years hasn't happened. But I was very happy to bring to James Madison University in Virginia many talented musicians through this partnership. And they were not only pianists. Each year I brought one winner of the competition in Brazil who could study at James Madison University and pursue their master's or doctoral degree. And I was very happy about that. So we had amazing pianists, but also a flutist, a saxophone player, a percussionist, clarinet, I believe we also brought. We had so many great musicians. And so I was very happy to be now living in America, being able to help a young musician to do exactly what I did when I left Brazil, which was to fulfill my dream. It's just to be able to go abroad, to specialize in what I love. And I was really happy when the partnership was taking place because I could really feel responsible, and I was feeling that I could help a Brazilian student become the best they can be and either continue their journey in America or wherever they want, or go back to Brazil and contribute with their knowledge and everything they learned at our university. So now we don't have the partnership at the moment, but I do get involved with community work in my town in Harrisonburg. We offer funds, try to raise funds, and in fact help children who cannot afford piano lessons or guitar lessons, and we look at their talent and their will. If they are willing to take lessons and you can see they really want and have facility, we help them. So we want to continue with this in Harrisonburg, and to provide a chance to all those people who would not be able to continue their studies otherwise. And in a way, it happened with me too, because I couldn't, I go back to the past. I remember not being able to pay for my course at the conservatory, but my aunt said, no, I'll do this for you. And then once I could get a scholarship to go study in America, same thing. Someone could pay for me. And, it made me become who I am today. So I'm very happy to, as much as I can, to help those young students who are willing to follow the same journey.
That's wonderful. In some ways, you're paying it forward. What does resilience mean to you?
Resilience means strength, but also means elasticity, because it's being able to withstand problem or difficulty, but at the same time is not being able to withstand it, is in a way being able to persevere or to insist, or sometimes to change according to whatever you're faced with. So in my opinion is being able to face whatever you have to face. At the same time, you have to be open and just an elastic, like a rubber band that is going to bend according to what the problem or tension or pressure is. And from there, be able to adjust. So for me, it's all that is being flexible too. I think being resilient is to be flexible.
What are your practices of resilience?
I think the first thing is to breathe, to find time to think about whatever issue you have. And this is in life in general, can also be in music. I think the most important thing is to not panic, although we all do. But first, as soon as you're faced with something that is hard to get over, you have to pause. And this is what I tell my students in the beginning of every single performance, before you go on stage, even when you are on stage, when you sit down to play, the first thing to do is breathe, which we forget. Or we get so nervous that that's the first thing that is gone. And then, of course, because we don't really breathe deeply, our heart beats faster, and then, of course, crashes happen in music, for example. So I would say that be patient, accept that many times you're not going to get what you expect. And for performances too, we tend to think that we have to be perfect. And if we think we need to be perfect, then there is no way to perform, because we have to accept that we are humans and humans make errors. And therefore, if there's an error, so what? I will not even remember this in 10 years. Today, yes, I remember that and very vividly. But I keep telling myself that too. I keep telling my students, and I keep using it to myself, that we don't have to be perfect. We should not be perfect, because then that's when we'll be finally being ourselves, right? Because we can do music much more freely if we accept that we for sure have to practice. But if we accept that we can make mistakes, we are allowed to make mistakes. And for some reason, if we think that way, this huge, big black cloud that is over us before we perform is gone. Unless you did not practice. And I tell my students, if they practiced, then they can use this concept or this technique. If they did not practice, this is not going to help. So the secret is also, of course, do your best and work hard as you can.
So, the lifting of the dark cloud through acceptance and breathing, how does that benefit you?
It makes me focus on something else. As soon as I enter on stage, I cannot think of failure, of course, right? I cannot think of, oh, this is hard. I have to only think of, oh, I practiced all these months for this, and now I'm excited to present it to this audience. It makes me feel lighter, right? It makes me think of something else. It's not fear anymore, it's the excitement for playing. I will still get nervous, yes, that is part of our nature, but somehow it's a switch in our mind that I have to use. It's like, okay, now I'm on performance mode, I'm going to show what I can do, and I know it will be good because it has been good for 99 times I practiced. If I practice only for 10 to 12 times, it's not going to work. But if I insisted and I know that I can do it well, somehow it helps me in the end, and it helps me be successful.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you?
You can follow me on Instagram, Paulo Steinberg. You're going to see lots of videos of myself teaching, of postings of my students, techniques that I normally use with my students, pieces that I play, but also ways that will help pianists become a better musician. So I would say the first thing would be Instagram. You can also add me on Facebook, or you can send me an email that you can find through the website of the university where I teach, James Madison University. My biography is there with my contact, my email address. Feel free to reach me anytime with questions. I'll be happy to answer.
And that's also how they can request a CD?
Yes, the best would be to email me and then request a CD. I'll be happy to send them. We just have to do the calculation with shipping and so on. But yeah, please just email me.
Paulo, thank you so much for coming on my show, especially at this late hour, since you are in Latvia right now. It is late at night for you. And I know that you have a recital tomorrow. So thank you so much for making the time to share your passion for Brazilian classical music and for educating us. So thank you.
And thank you for the invitation. I had a great time talking about Brazilian music and about what I like to do the most. So it was my pleasure, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandes. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.